Welcome to Normalize Therapy. Today, we're tackling a subject that impacts countless marriages, but is rarely discussed with the nuance and the compassion that it deserves. How to support a partner who is a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. The journey is incredibly challenging, not just for the survivor, but for the spouse who stands beside them, often feeling confused, helpless, and sometimes alone. And our guest today is Mary DeMuth. She's an author, a speaker, and a survivor herself who has shared her story with incredible vulnerability, offering a lifeline to so many. Her work, alongside her husband Patrick, provides a rare and vital window into the journey from both sides, the survivor and their spouse. There are many resources out there for survivors, for which I'm thankful, but today we're focusing on the partners of survivors. And our goal here today is to create a compassionate and practical resource for loving partners, helping them navigate their unique path with hope and wisdom. Let's get into it. Mary, thank you so much for joining us on Normalize Therapy. Your willingness to speak on difficult topics like this is a lifeline for so many. And the primary goal for our conversation today is just to create a compassionate and practical resource for the partners of sexual abuse survivors. We're kind of really niching onto that topic. Before we dive in, for listeners who may not be familiar with your story, could you share a little bit about why this topic is so close to your heart?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I am a survivor of sexual assault in several different kinds of forms, primarily 1 year as a kindergartner for multiple times. And so there's just a lot of sexual brokenness there. And I think for me, it's this knowing the statistics and knowing how many people, whether men or women, who have been sexually assaulted in some way or another, it deeply impacts your intimate relationships. And
Yes.
and it was not, no one ever talked to us about it, and it was not an easy climb out of that hole. So I just am here to offer some hope, because there were many years where I felt hopeless about it.
Yeah, indeed. And as you say, like I've noticed that too, even on the clinical side, there's a lot of literature for helping survivors, but much less material available for people in relationship with each other. So in one of your articles, Mary, you described being at a women's conference where the speaker was exhorting women to be a hottie for your honey. And uh, just your description of feeling so uncomfortable and out of place, I could just really picture that as I was reading that. And you also use the phrase of feeling like a skinny girl at a sumo wrestling seminar. That kind of really powerful image of feeling alienated, like I'm in the wrong place here. Can you talk about that gap between the common cultural or church narrative about marital sex and the actual reality for survivors of childhood sexual abuse?
I remember sitting in that room. It was probably 500 to 800 women at a Christian women's conference. And
Wow.
it was the one time where I almost stood up and hollered, because I was
Yeah.
like, there were so many expectations put on women in that conference that was just impossible for me. And there's two problems. One problem is, as a survivor of sexual abuse, some of the things they were telling us to do were impossible for me, at least at that
Hmm.
time. The second
Okay.
part was that in a lot of these spaces, they, in Christian spaces a lot, they'll be like, don't have sex before marriage. Okay, great. The moment you're married, then
Hmm.
suddenly you have to just be there and
Yes.
100%
Yeah.
okay with everything, when you've been told that it's bad and awful and terrible up until that point, and you have to suddenly change your
Yeah.
mindset. So if you take those two things together, if you're a sexual abuse
Okay.
victim and you've been raised in that kind of evangelical complex,
Yeah.
it makes for a very disappointing and freaked out wedding night.
Yeah.
So I was
Yeah.
completely terrified. And then also just being in that conference, I was so mad because I knew the statistics,
Mm.
and I knew that between anywhere from 40 to 75% of those women had been sexually assaulted in some way, some even in their marriage.
Wow.
And for
Wow.
them to be forced or pressured, which it was pressure to act a certain way, was hard enough for someone with no injury, but
Yeah.
almost impossible for someone with sexual injury.
Yeah. Yeah. We can totally understand that. just even apart from any injurious, actions against a person in their past. When if you're raised in a like a don't have sex, sex is bad messaging, especially you have stored in your body this thing which says avoid, avoid, avoid. And
Hmm.
then day of marriage, you're supposed to flip a switch and it can be super challenging for so many people. And I can't even imagine layering on top of that when you're a survivor of sexual violence and your body is just like, what? This is safe now?
Hmm. It's very
Can be super
confusing.
challenging, very confusing, and your anger does make sense too for that context. And so while it it makes sense that the sexual intimacy is a huge challenge, you've also written about how trauma affects everybody or everyday non-sexual affection too. So not just sort of that being a hottie for your honey piece, but even things that might be considered mundane or more just sort of day-to-day low-key moments, gestures of affection. Used this beautiful and kind of funny metaphor about it being easier to chase an aloof cat than to hug your own family sometimes. Can you unpack that for us? Like, how does the trauma footprint extend beyond sex into daily acts of physical touch?
Well, typically, and not always, but typically in an abusive situation, your body helps you by disassociating you. And for instance, when I was being harmed in these very scary parks in the Pacific Northwest as a 5-year old, I'd fly up to the top of the trees. I would dissociate from it.
Yeah.
Um, and so that becomes this like safety pattern for you, is to disassociate from your life. And of course, that will come out, as you mentioned, in sex, but also just intimacy and this fear of connecting with your body. Therefore, even I wrote an article on we2.org about how affection is hard for sexual abuse victims. And I had to, like, in a lot of spheres. So I also was raised in a home where there was very little affection. I had to beg for it. And so when my kids
Okay.
would be injured, I knew what the right thing to do was. I knew that I needed to comfort them. I needed to wrap my arms around them. I needed to let them cry and tell them everything's going to be okay. I needed to get a Band-Aid. But that was not innate to me. So I had to tell myself to do those things, which is a very weird thing because you want to just be naturally affectionate, but it was not my fallback. My fallback was to disassociate, or I had no example at all. And so I had to coach myself internally, like, your child is crying, they need a hug. You were really sad when you didn't get a hug, so do this. And so it's
Yeah.
just a
Yeah.
lot of, in a way, kind of cognitive behavioral therapy internally, I guess you can put it.
Yeah.
But it's just so hard. And I think because there's a huge vulnerability in eye-to-eye
Hmm.
contact or kissing or hugging, it's vulnerable. You open yourself up
Yeah.
to be harmed if you're vulnerable that way.
No, it makes a ton of sense. Like your body having associated the violence with, bodily activities normally associated with healthy intimacy at such a young age wouldn't be able to distinguish between this is a safe, like I'm hugging a child now versus a threatening situation just would raise alarm bells. Thank you for sharing that. It makes a lot of sense that it does have that reach. And I think a lot of people, it's just going to help them understand what could be going on for them. And I hear you saying, Mary, that in those moments, in your calmer moments, you like cognitively, you knew what needed to be done in that moment of connection. And it's almost like you had to coach yourself into that, though, real time while it was happening to remind yourself, okay, this is safe right here. This is my child.
Yes, along with a begging of the Lord, please help me do this naturally because it's not in my wheelhouse. And so there was a lot of kind of uncomfortableness of,
Hmm.
um, why doesn't God answer this question? Why doesn't he answer this prayer? Why can't he
Hmm.
make me into this affectionate person on my timetable? Which, to be fair,
Okay.
God's timetable
Yeah.
is longer than ours.
Hmm.
But there was a real ache inside of me of I'm tired of coaching myself, and I want this to be a natural thing. Now, thankfully, in the weird way God made me, we're all so unique. Deeply, I always score very high on empathy, like it's off the scales. And so I thankfully have that motivation underneath it all. So that does help me to step into someone else's shoes is
Right.
natural for me. It's the physical aspect of I'm stepping in your shoes and then I'm feeling it with you that's a little bit harder.
Right. For sure. So if I'm hearing you correctly, there's like another layer of like frustration on top of not sort of naturally being able to do it, as you say. There's an added layer of sort of self frustration with why can't I just make this easier? Frustration with God. Why isn't He allowing me or healing me so that I can just do this thing that I know is right and normal?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Challenging. So just kind of moving a little bit, that helps us kind of set the stage and understand a little bit of how your experiences of various forms of intimate expression were impacted um, by sexual violence. But just shifting a little bit toward the partner experience, which is where we were wanting to go today, Mary. One of the things that you have written about, I noted again in one article, and I think he has shared a book or two with you from your husband, Patrick. Is that right?
Yeah, he wrote part
Yeah,
of Not Marked. So at the
not
end of
marked.
every chapter, he shares his perspective as a non-sexual abuse victim. That was not his, but being married or being a partner to someone who is a sexual abuse victim and his side of it. I just have not seen much of that written about. And so when I was writing the book, I thought he needs to have his say in here because this is a really important part of the piece.
Yeah, lovely. No, it's such a huge resource. If you're comfortable sharing a little bit on his behalf for the husband or partner listening right now who feels maybe completely lost or just like unsure, what were some of Patrick's initial reactions, misunderstandings when you realized the depth of how your past was impacting your present?
I think part of the problem was myself in that when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I was at a university. It wasn't a Christian university, but I had all these really great Christ following friends who loved me, listened to me, and prayed for me. And so at the end of that, I kind of made this little declaration like, I'm healed now. And so when we started dating, I'm always a very open book. So there's no surprise here. He knew all about the sexual
Okay.
abuse, but I couched it in, but God has healed me, not understanding that the moment I
Yeah.
had sex, I would be 100% triggered and it would be really hard. But I was like,
Okay.
I'm done. This is it. I got my healing,
Yes.
not realizing that I would be on layers and layers and layers and layers of healing for the rest of my life. Hooray. So
Yeah.
to be fair to him, I did disclose. He
Okay.
thought everything was fine because I told him it was fine. And the moment we got married, I'm such a good girl. I want to do everything right. And so I was so conflicted about it. So what I did was I just pushed it down because I wanted to be this godly Christian wife and I wanted to be available to my husband. And any sort of terror or fear, I just tolerated it. Now, that
Mm,
is not fun for a couple. And I'm sure that he felt
no.
that. And I had to psych
Yeah.
myself up every time. And then I would feel
Yeah.
so guilty if I didn't. And then I would hit
Yeah.
myself over the head and
Wow.
just be like, you're not a very good Christian for not, doing what whoever they are, doing what they told you to do. And so you can imagine my own, like, oh, just the pain that was there that was unspoken.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
his bewilderment over why does she have to psych herself up and why doesn't she love me this way? And
Right.
why is it hard? It's like a chore for her, but for me, it's a delight. And I couldn't cross that bound. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't. And so for several years, I just pretended and just tried
Mm,
because I wanted to be a good
mm,
Christian girl.
yeah. Yeah. So more of that sort of pressure on you to do the right thing, to be the right person, the right way. It sounds like it was definitely at the hidden cost of the abuse that you experienced. Yeah.
Definitely. And I don't think
Yeah.
I thought it was serving him. It didn't serve us well. We would have done a lot better if we had just talked about everything openly, but that's really hard to do in that particular area of your life. It's embarrassing. It's taboo. I had no example. And really, the Christian sex manuals out there were mostly about his needs and not hers, and mostly
Yeah.
about just conjure it up, make sure he has sex or he'll have an affair. So, there's all this pressure on so many
Yes.
levels.
I've told a few people to rip that chapter out of that book.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate that.
If you don't mind me asking, like, I don't want to in any way dishonor your story, but just as we're sort of bringing the spouse part in, is that
Mhm.
okay? Um, was there a point at which Patrick or either of you said out loud, or there was some recognition that, hey, I think this ties back to the trauma in my past?
I knew that, but for whatever reason, I had convinced myself that I had been healed. And even though
Yeah.
obviously I hadn't been, or
Mm.
I'd only gone
Yeah.
so far in that healing.
Mm.
Um, and I
Fair.
think there were some frustrating times where I would say that, of course, it has something to do with it, but I literally don't know how to fix it. And I am lost. And it feels impossible to me. And you have no idea how much I pray about this. And, just this fear, too, if I was really honest, that it would just tear everything apart. Because
Mm.
this is what happens for spouses. They feel alone. They feel rejected, rightfully so, because they are. And
Mm.
and that can build up a huge marital wall. It can build up a lot of anger. In fact, he even said once he was just really, really mad at those neighborhood boys that did that to me as a 5-year-old, because they stole something from our marriage. And I
Yeah.
agree, they did, and it's
Yeah.
unfair. But I
Yeah.
think we have to be very careful about these highfalutin marriage books that has like two healthy people at the center, and we compare ourselves to those two healthy people. It's not helpful for people that have gone through trauma, especially complex trauma, which is a whole nother
Yeah.
layer of trauma.
Yep.
But it's so insidious because if I am trying, I don't know anything. If I'm looking at these, supposed perfect Christian couples who are having sex every night and love each other so much and no problems and, all that, I'm going to feel like I have failed. And then my husband is going to feel like he's been deprived because I'm not it. Instead of looking at the two of us as a unique set of two people,
Yes.
two image bearers with two
Yes.
different sets of problems, and
Yeah.
looking at the problem as the thing to attack rather than turning on
Yes.
each other and attacking each other for not being those ideals.
Yeah. Yeah. So much of that makes a ton of sense. And I think too, even beyond the problems in Christian literature, just the portrayal in common media of how easily people move towards sexual intimacy all the time. And there's no, or very little that I'm aware of. Of course, I'm not searching for it, I guess, either, but there's very little like realistic portrayal of people running into their trauma as
Mm-hmm.
things maybe get a little bit more intimate or close between them. Um, so that makes a ton of sense. And it makes sense too that when you don't really have a frame for fully understanding what's going on, like perhaps in Patrick's case, it's easy to blame yourself or to interpret it as rejection
Mm-hmm.
in one of those two things. And both of those are very hard to solve. Those feelings. They're
Because
very challenging feelings to
100,
experience.
100% he felt rejected. So I'm not,
Mhm.
I mean, it's a valid feeling because it happened. So it wasn't intentional. I wasn't intentionally doing it. By
You
golly,
were
not at
trying your
all.
hardest.
But it still
Mhm.
feels that way. So I definitely hold space for the pain that caused him, even though it wasn't what I
Yeah.
wanted. But I couldn't jump
Yeah.
out of the trauma magically. And there was so
Yeah.
much more to walk through.
Yeah. Yeah. So in one article I read, Patrick wrote with incredible honesty about his own journey from feeling helpless and angry, as you said, feeling like the intimacy had been torn from you both or taken away from you to becoming a safe place for you. What, if you can recall or share anything, like what was that turning point for him?
When I was writing Not Marked and a little prior to that and speaking more openly about this to the public, he started reading some books about trauma and sexual trauma. And his eyes were really open, and it's like he was like, "Oh my gosh, you're
Yes.
trying so hard, and I thought you weren't trying at all, and your mountain that you had to get up to where you are now." So he developed this
Okay.
empathy. There's this metaphor that I read once in Christianity Today. That really resonated with me, and I use it in a book called "We Too: How the Church Can Respond Redemptively to the Sexual Abuse Crisis." So, in that, I talked about this maze, and it's like one of those mazes that is in Great Britain, and you're walking through it. And I was at the end of the maze, and there were 100 obstacles before I would make it to the end. He was at toward the end of the maze and had to make maybe 2 or 3 turns to get to the end. And so, uh, he finally realized that I was at the back of the maze, and I was just
Okay.
beginning my journey of left, right, 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 left. And I think a lot of times, and this is just a societal thing, a lot of times people at the end of the maze who only have to make a few turns are very judgy about the people that have complex trauma that are just trying to get through it. And their win is way back beyond what you've already dealt with. So,
Yeah.
it doesn't make logical sense to him that he thinks we're starting at the same place, but I'm way back here. And because I'm way back here, every little step is so important. It needs to be acknowledged, but he sees it as we're still behind. And that, I think, is difficult.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Almost like put another way, like he was starting with like sex starts with the wedding night,
Mhm.
but it's the history before that that adds all those turns to the maze for survivors. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And I love the fact that he read books too.
Mhm.
As a therapist, it's a funny thing because we can tell our clients a lot of stuff, but there's some things that are just so powerful for them to read in a book, either for self-compassion or compassion for another person. So it sounds like that was a real turning point for him, or part of the turning point was just getting educated
Yeah.
about like a window into the experience of survivors.
Yes, and by a professional too, so that he could see that this wasn't just random, it was actually, like,
Yeah.
clinically proven that this is a
Yes.
problem, and
Yeah.
especially with my story of so many really tremendously hard layers of, even from my father. So, having, like, incestual problems as well as outside the family sexual abuse. I mean, there's just too much there that
Yeah.
I feel like any healing I get is miraculous. But,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so he definitely got a messed up girl when he got married. She really tried hard, but she was messed up.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. And what may have helped him or what might help a partner move past their own sense of rejection? So say they learn a little bit about this, maybe they're even listening today. What helps them maybe more in the moment move past that sense of rejection and sort of that temptation just to say like, why can't you be over this or why can't we be past this?
I think we need community, and, there
Hmm.
is a great amount of camaraderie that happens when you talk to other couples who have walked through this. Now, it's hard to approach them.
Okay.
Like, you kind of have to know someone's story to be able to approach it. But when I mean, I've also noticed in my own experience in counseling couples as a layperson, I know many, at least on the woman's side, that they just will not have sex with their husband ever. And I would
Yep.
try to inform him of that. Like, I'm trying. um, so, talking to a spouse like that, they can see that this is an actual typical problem, and they can find, camaraderie and, someone else who's been there too, that can be really helpful.
Right.
So they know they're not the only person in the world. Their wife isn't the worst wife ever. There are other wives and other
Right.
husbands, if the husband is a sexual abuse victim, because it can be both ways. They're not alone. I would say there must be at least 40% of marriages that are dealing with this, and no one is talking about it. We need to start
Has
talking
to
about
be.
it.
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah, community is so powerful, for sure. Yeah. And just maybe more on a practical note, then, like you've described how a survivor can feel used if a spouse initiates sex without emotional connection first. And again, that can be a little bit cliched in the Christian literature, but I'm guessing this is particularly important for survivors, like how a certain kind of touch can be a trigger, even. And those
hmm
signals can be confusing because of the history and the interpretive layers that imposes upon it. What practical advice can you offer partners on how to initiate intimacy, both emotional and physical, in a way that feels safe and honoring to their survivor spouse?
I've been frank about this before. Because a sexual abuse victim had no agency and obviously no intimacy before that happened, typically, it's usually abusive of some sort.
Yeah.
If there's no relational intimacy prior, a sexual abuse victim feels raped. Even though it is not the intention of the spouse, they would be completely devastated to hear that.
Mm,
But it's a reality. And so you have to be
right.
extra cautious about approaching your spouse if you've done no deposits into the relational bank, because we'll just feel so used. Like, I'm just a body to you.
Mhm,
It will trigger us
mhm.
back. Now, that's a different thing
Yes.
than
Yeah.
them doing something that triggers you. So that requires an honest conversation. And believe me, I didn't do it for a couple years because I was freaked out about
Okay.
it. I didn't want to talk about
Yeah.
when you touch me there, it freaks me out and I'm remembering rape, so it's
Yeah.
very delicate, but I found
Right.
that as we were more honest in those areas, there was a relief that came in, because
Mm,
I don't want to do anything that's going to harm him, and he doesn't want to do anything that's going
mhm,
to cause me to trigger. So
mhm.
it's better if we're honest, even though it's like, oh, so scary and
Yeah.
freaky and all of that stuff.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
I once we jumped over that hurdle, things got
Okay.
so much better. But it took a long
Ah,
time to be able to say those things to each other, because it's really
yeah.
embarrassing, and it's just it's just a hard
Right.
thing to talk about.
Yeah. For sure. For sure. But naming those triggers and then seeing him honor
Right.
that led to greater feelings of safety, is what I'm
Yes.
hearing,
Yeah.
as well as really underscoring the importance of the emotional connection, not feeling objectified at all. If
Correct.
I'm following you,
Yeah.
have I got you?
Yep.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, that is super helpful to hear. In another part, Patrick described a vision of you on a high diving board, afraid to jump into the family pool below. And this was, I believe, his perspective of that. I took the pool to mean like fully present, emotional engagement, connection, togetherness.
Yeah,
And it
he's
speaks to like
brought me
some of the profound emotional
to you.
disengagement that survivors can experience. How can a partner gently and patiently encourage their spouse, I was going to say, to take that leap, but maybe just to move towards, to risk emotional connection without applying pressure that makes them retreat further?
I think he did a good job in creating that emotional word picture for me, because I literally would not have known that I was disconnected had he not given me
Okay.
that picture. And so it
Okay.
was like a gift from God through
Wow.
that metaphor, through that picture. And it caused me to say to the Lord, okay, I obviously have another layer here of healing, and I don't want to be the one on the high dive, pacing back and forth and never jumping into the lives of my family. I don't want to, that's not what I want. Please help me to jump in. And I think it'll be a lifelong battle for me, honestly. In my most intimate relationships, I have lots of good
Mm,
friends, and it doesn't seem to be a problem there. But in terms of my family, it can be that way. It's better every
mhm.
day. Um, but that's where you're most tender, right? You're most tender in the
Yeah.
places where people know you the deepest and the best.
Yes.
And so I think one thing I can say practically is that to ask the Lord to give you a picture of what it feels like for you to be emotionally disconnected from your spouse, and help them to see that this is not an indictment. Like, you are bad and you're not jumping into the life of your family. It was more like, we have so much for you. We want your joy. We want you splashing around in the pool. So the motivation wasn't, you need to fix yourself. It's, no, we want to have fun together. And that's a whole different kind of way to approach it. It's a compassionate way to approach
Right.
versus like, well, you're not emotionally connecting to me and I'm mad at you,
Yep.
which has happened
Yeah.
too. But that was a much better picture for me.
Right. So it's much like definitely not the on the diving board, we need to push her into the pool as much
No.
as like we're having fun. And it sounds very invitational.
Right.
Like, hey, would you join us? This is a playful, safe space and all
Mhm.
that. Lovely. Yeah, beautiful metaphor. You mentioned in one article a powerful concept from Dr. Dan Allender, and I love his work as well, that healing is more effective when the non-abused spouse
Mhm.
also explores their own childhood wounds. And I thought this was super, super cool because I did not expect this one, but of course it makes a ton of sense. You know, be they stab wounds or just pinpricks that that person has experienced. How did it change the dynamic in your marriage when Patrick began exploring his own story? And why is sort of we're in this together, like the therapy together, almost not necessarily in the same sessions, but we're in this work of self-discovery and healing together, much more powerful than a dynamic of one person being healed and the other being the broken one.
Yeah, that was our dynamic for so long. And
Mm.
I was the broken one. He was the normal one. And we stayed in that dynamic for a long time. I felt so alone. And granted, I've got a pretty terrible story, and his is different than mine. But as he began to look at his home of origin, and there were plenty of little pieces of trauma in there, I finally felt like it was two people working on their brokenness together versus me always being the broken one. That changed everything. And I think that was the gateway for us to begin to have honest conversations, even about sex, because I didn't feel like it was like this top down, like, oh, well, I'm the healed one, you're the broken one, I need to pull you up here. It was more like, we're on the same playing field, we all have wounds, and I didn't feel like I was the broken one anymore, that we were both broken
Yeah.
and we were working on it together.
Yeah. Such a beautiful shift to, I remember when I studied family therapy, which I haven't actually practiced, even though it's one of the letters in my degree. But part of it is quite often in families, somebody comes in and they're the identified patient. The IP
Mhm.
is the short acronym we give them in the family. And the family's kind of organized around this person being the one who needs fixed. And part of the effectiveness of family therapy is saying, okay, how does everyone contribute to this? And it just shifts the pressure off the IP, or maybe someone is typically called the black sheep. But even
Mhm.
in couples too, Mary, I could just resonate with that so much because sometimes we get folks coming in, their spouse won't come, and they're like, it's all about changing the other person. And it's like, well, you know, if nothing good can happen in your life until the other person changes,
Mhm.
you're completely powerless.
Right.
But if you're willing to open up and to explore yourself and realize that, hey, we all have stuff from our family of origin that needs healed, that needs worked on, transformation, growth that can happen, then you have a lot more power and agency to work on something and see how the coupleship or the family system moves around that, because it will shift. And it sounds like that's what happened for you guys.
Yeah, definitely. There's a camaraderie instead of me against him and him against me. Now we're together working on common things and, family of origin things together, and having conversations about that is really different. Yeah, I see a lot
Wow.
of couples where they're like what you said, they're going back and forth against each other, and it's better for them to have a common enemy rather than them creating the common enemy as the other.
There's so much more potential for change that enters into a person's life when they uh, take on the idea that, like, I can change myself here and then see what happens in our relationship or in our family that also shifts rather than just sort of being dependent on this person that I can't control, really.
Exactly. Romans 12 at the end of it, it says, as far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. And that means that we can work on our own stuff. We can't force someone else to
Yeah.
change. And like you said, if our
Yeah.
happiness is dependent on someone else changing, we won't be happy. So you can only, maybe become better at creating boundaries, or you can, like what my husband did, work on his own issues because that's something he could control. But you can't force the other person to change. They have to really want to, because change is hard, and
Yeah.
forced change doesn't work. And you have to have volition and want to.
Yeah. And the energy to
Yes.
as
Yeah.
well to do that personal work, which a person doesn't always have access to throughout the span of their lifetime, right? So, no, it's super helpful. Let's talk about a situation where many of our listeners are in. Their spouse, their survivor is not yet the survivor is not yet in therapy, and their past is perhaps unaddressed, perhaps even unspoken, hasn't been named yet. How does a partner's role differ in that situation? Sort of in the, I don't know if that's earlier in marriage or earlier in recovery, anyways. What are the first most crucial steps for a partner when professional help isn't yet part of the equation?
Well, I mean, for me, that was true for us, but it wasn't for lack of wanting. We just didn't have financial means to get counseling. So I wasn't able
Okay.
to get it until he was in seminary, and they provided it through people that were becoming counselors. They would like experiment on you, but it was
Okay.
free. So it was great.
Internships, yes.
So there's that issue, just the financial part of it. Some people just can't afford it. It's so
Yeah.
expensive. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
so what I did during that time, and what I would encourage people to do, is I had to be counseled and mentored through books. And that's what my spouse did as well. Um, you can
Mm,
you can ask a spouse, like if you have a book that kind of says, this typifies what I've been through, you can ask your spouse and say, hey, if you really want to understand what I'm going through, this should give you a good idea. I think that's an honest request. It's not a forcing, it's just a request. And
yep.
that can be a really good part of the healing journey. That's what we
Yeah.
did, and it worked. It helped.
Yeah. I love how accessible that is. It's a low barrier to
Mm-hmm.
entry. Yeah. Because therapy can be expensive, like you
Mm-hmm.
say. Yeah. And then for the partner whose spouse is in therapy, Mary, their healing work can sometimes feel like a private and mysterious process, like very tender moments. What is the partner's role there? How can they support that journey without intruding? How do they handle when new challenges or painful memories are brought up?
I think it starts with a decision by the both of you to be honest and to say, I I need to know what you're going through, but I will let you lead. The trauma survivor should have agency in being able to say, I had a really hard counseling session today. I'm not ready to talk about it right now, but give me a week or give
Yeah.
me a month, or let me write it down first so I can process it. And then I'm absolutely wanting to
Yeah.
talk with you about it. I'm too jumbled up right now to be able to
Yeah.
talk about it. And if you can create the kind of marriage that the other person isn't offended by that, and they can say, okay, I can wait. I know that
Yeah.
he or she's been trustworthy. They've told me the things in due time.
Yeah.
But you have to understand that trauma never is quick, and processing through it is never quick. Plus, you may have done like EMDR, and it's sometimes even hard to explain what
Yeah.
happened. So there's that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It can take even a couple of days after a session for stuff to consolidate in your mind as to what you actually went through and processed in a session. So it makes a ton of sense. Consent is what I hear you saying. Offering your spouse consent as they're going through it is very important. And of course, like validating it, I would imagine is huge too when they do
Mm-hmm.
share. Yeah. Just those simple words, that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. You've talked about honesty quite a bit, and you unpacked it. Learn to speak frankly and saying things like, when you do this, I feel used, or when you don't kiss me, I feel distant. I noticed that in some of your writings, Mary. That level of honesty can be terrifying for some people. Do you have any advice on how a couple can even begin to have those conversations, especially if like this thing has maybe been shrouded in silence for years, even?
Yeah. Um, First of all, it depends upon a fairly safe marriage to be able to do that. So you have to kind of
Yeah.
analyze whether you feel safe or not. One thing that we've done for
Yeah.
couples is to provide a safe space for them to vent, because they often are living in their heads. They haven't expressed it to their partner, and somehow it's weirdly more comforting to say it in front of a
Yeah.
couple that they feel safe with. So sometimes that's a really good way to get through it if you don't have a counselor, but you feel safe with a couple that maybe has had some similar issues to you before, and just to say the things. Even recently, we've watched couples like, you believe that? Or you went through that? Or, oh my gosh. And we were like, this is what communication is. This is so good.
Yeah.
But there's just that
Yes.
safety of
Love it.
knowing there's someone else to say, oh, that must have been really hard. Or I recognize that you
Right.
sharing that right now was really difficult, but it's needed and
Yep.
necessary for you guys to be able to talk about this openly.
Yep. A little bit of a buffer.
Yeah, buffer
think.
is a good word,
Yeah. Makes a
which
ton
can
of
be the
sense.
same in therapy
Yeah.
as well.
And for the partner listening who feels hopeless and maybe even quite stuck right now, what's the single most important piece of advice or encouragement, I should say, that you would give them as they stay in that place of committing to loving their spouse through a long, perhaps often painful, but ultimately a hopeful journey of healing? What's the one thing you'd really want them to know?
That the most important thing in our walk with Christ is our growth. And we grow through a cruciform life. And often the Lord will use other people in our lives where we have to take up our cross daily and follow Him. And so if you can shift your perspective from that person is hurting me, making me mad, and rejecting me, to Jesus understood what this was like. I can share in His sufferings, and this can be a part of my discipleship journey and growing closer to Christ.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another level of depth of walking with Jesus for sure. And not all people are there. But if you can get to that place, it's really quite beautiful, because it's not about Jesus change that person. It's about Jesus grow me and use this difficulty and this pain that I'm going through so that we can have camaraderie together and we can experience suffering together. Because when you suffer alongside Jesus, there's just something really intimate about that.
Thank you for saying that, Mary. It makes so much sense. And just as you were saying that, I was remembering a beautiful memory I have of one of my supervisors who did a lot of work with couples. And one of the ways that he liked to challenge a couple was to say to them, like, what if this was the one person that you needed in your life to do the healing, the growth work that you need to do? And just that sense of that, like, instead of this, something went wrong or I didn't realize what I was getting into, it's a reframe towards, hey, like, this is the person that God put in front of me to compel me towards the kind of growth. And it's exactly the person that I needed.
And to see them as a gift
very
to
beautiful.
you rather than an obstacle to overcome.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Love it. Love it. Super helpful, Mary. Thank you so much for sharing that. And this whole thing has been incredibly insightful. Your books, particularly the one you mentioned, Not Marked, dive so much deeper into this. Where can people find that book, and where can they connect with you and the rest of your work?
Yeah, so Not Marked is on Amazon, and it's Finding Hope and Healing After Sexual Abuse. If you look at my name, you'll find it. Another one that I mentioned earlier is We Too, How the Church Can Respond Redemptively to the Sexual Abuse Crisis. I have found a lot of survivors have really been helped by that because they've been so marginalized by church. So few people really understand. And it's a nice way of figuring out, not only what went wrong, but how can we create better places for people and spiritual places. I have, related to that, I have a website called we2.org, and there's lots of resources there to help sexual abuse survivors. At we2.org/21 days, there's a freebie. So they can sign up and they'll get 21 emails, one a day for 3 weeks, of all my best practices of healing from sexual abuse and sexual trauma. It's absolutely free.
Wow.
It's included with a sexual
Yeah.
abuse impact quiz, which is a great tool to use with your
Okay.
spouse. And so you
Mm,
can print it off and you
mm,
can check some of the things that, traits or things that have happened to you that show the impact of sexual abuse. And then you can present it to your partner. And
yeah.
it's very eye-opening to be able to do that, because a lot of times we
Wow.
don't have words to say. We just say, I'm messed up. But okay, here's 23 things that I know I suffer from today
Yeah.
because of the abuse. That's so much more concrete.
Huh. That sounds like an amazing resource. Love it. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Mary. I can't thank you enough, Mary, for that, for your time here. Your wisdom and your vulnerability are such a profound gift to the world. So thank you for helping us to normalize this conversation and to also to like speak to the niche aspect of this, the experience of partners as well. Very much
Thank you. It's been a
appreciated.
pleasure.